Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
At some point in your life, you said, "No way, man, I'm never going to become like my parents." Yes, you did. Don't lie. We all did. We vowed that we'd never become old and stodgy and boring and stuck in our ways, and we would never be closed to new ideas. And your parents probably reacted to your pronouncements in a manner similar to something like this.
I used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what's it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you.
Do not panic. This is totally natural. This cycle of life has been going on since the invention of music, and it only accelerated with the birth of the recording industry in the late 1800s. Every generation has its thing, and every generation thinks that the people who came before them and comes after them are weird and wrong.
No way, man. We're gonna keep on rocking forever. 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 Forever.
What's wrong, homie?
I went to the record store today and they were playing all this music I never heard of. It was like the store had gone crazy.
Record stores have always seemed crazy to me, but it doesn't upset me. Music is none of my business.
That's fine for you, Marge, but I used to rock and roll all night and party every day. Then it was every other day. Now I'm lucky if I can find half an hour a week in which to get funky.
This is part 2 of The More Things Change, the More Things Stay the Same.
This is the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross.
Get old.
Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats with I Need Never Get Old. Hold on to that thought. It's a good one. Hello again. I'm Alan Cross, and this is the second half of a program I call The More Things Change, the More They Stay the Same. And the goal here is to point out the many, many times generations have collided over musical taste and technology. There's no judgment here. This is simply a review of how these generational battles have been going on for a long, long time. Only the people and the players and the sound of the music are different. Like I said on part 1, every generation has a biological right to believe that the music of its youth is the greatest music ever made. To paraphrase, as much as you love your music, there is always going to be somebody younger or older to tell you that you're wrong. I read that in a book somewhere, but I can't remember where. Damn fine wisdom, though. This not only extends to conflicts in music, and we'll get to plenty of that later in the show, but it also extends to technology. When something new is introduced, there will always be people who say, A, the old ways are better and will always be better, and B, oh, I can figure out how to work the new ways, no problem. Let's go back 100 years to the way recording sessions were conducted. Musicians were gathered in a big room around a large acoustic horn. To balance the sound of the recording, the louder instruments were placed further back. Singers, if there was a singer, had to have good lungs because they needed to belt out the song at a volume that could be heard above the band. There were no microphones back then. All of this sound was funneled into this big acoustic horn, which caused a diaphragm to vibrate, which jiggled a stylus in response. The stylus cut a groove into a rotating disc, and this became the master recording. No editing, no mixing, no overdubbing, no tweaking. What the band played is what you got. If you didn't like it, well, you had to do it all over again. This was seen as pure recording, a faithful capturing of live music, and it was the only way things ever should be done. Here is a sample of what it sounded like. This is the original Dixieland Jazz Band with a recording made in 1917 using those original acoustic recording methods. All right, fast forward to 1925 and the introduction of electrical recording. This involved the use of these newfangled listening sticks called microphones, and also things called amplifiers. This was one of the very first electrical recordings made. It happened on March 26, 1925, and the artist is the International Novelty Orchestra. It's not bad for something recorded in the mid-1920s, right? But this did not go down well with the purists. The editor of Gramophone magazine wrote that the new noise of electrical recording is quite unbearable. He later wrote, "I do not believe that any audience could sit and listen nowadays to hours of electrical recording and remain sane." And the music was just the beginning. The purists hated what microphones and amplification did to singers. Instead of having to belt out their songs just to be heard above the band, the microphone became a new tool for the human voice, allowing it to go in all kinds of new directions.
I could change the gray clouds to blue if I had you. I could leave the old days behind, leave all my pals, I never mind. I could start my life all anew.
This new way of singing was called crooning, and it did not go down well with the old folks. "Crooning is a degenerate form of singing," wrote one critic. "Whiners and bleaters defiling the air. No true American would practice this base art. They are ribald and revolting to true men." And then we have this: "Soft, foul, crooner-obsessed Britain." That's from another critic. This was the beginning of decades of hate for new forms of vocal expression. R&B acts, Elvis, the Beatles, Dylan, Jagger, New Wavers, rappers, all the way up to and beyond death metalers. And this was all the result of the invention of that dastardly, dirty, perverting thing called the microphone.
Well, everybody rapping like it's a commercial, acting like life is a big commercial. So this is what I got to say to you all: be true to yourself and you will never fall. Now I'd like to pass the mic to the A. So what's your name? Yeah, my name is MCA.
Pass the mic from the Beastie Boys. The music purists of 1925 would have not liked that. Let's fast forward to the end of the 1940s and the beginning of the 1950s. This is when another technological innovation, one that made all of today's music possible, really annoyed the older generation. It was the adoption of magnetic tape and the invention of multi-track recording. Now let's start with magnetic tape. This was a Nazi invention brought back to the Allies as part of the spoils of war. Bing Crosby, one of those awful crooners, invested a lot of his own money in bringing magnetic tape technology to the commercial market. This revolutionized recording sessions because tape could be edited. If you wanted to splice two or more performances together, all you needed was a razor blade and some tape. "Wait, that's cheating," cried the purists. "If you can't play the song right the first time or in the way you intended, then you have no right to call yourself a musician." But it only got worse. This is where we encounter guitarist Les Paul, who began to fiddle with his tape machine. He figured out a way to make sound-on-sound recordings. He'd play a song through once, rewind the tape, and play another part on top of what he already recorded. He'd do this again and again until it sounded like a big ensemble of guitarists when it was really just one guy. The purists were apoplectic. That's even worse cheating. This music deceives the listener. It's impossible for one man to play this live, so it is wrong, wrong, wrong. The reaction against overdubbing was so fierce that the American Federation of Musicians actually put out an edict forbidding its members to participate in any recording session that used overdubbing. One of their biggest issues featured members being called into a session to lay down the instrumental background for a singer who would come in later. Now, this was great for the singer because it meant that they could work on their performance over and over again until it was perfect without having all these musicians sitting around. But it was awful for the musicians because if they were sent home, they were unable to charge for the time the singer spent working on their part. Now, today, multi-tracking and overdubbing is how all music is recorded. And it's not just 2 or 4 tracks. I once had a chat with Amy Lee of Evanescence, and a song like this has more than 200 tracks. In fact, she told me that she lost count of how many layers was put on this song. Evanescence, 200 plus tracks went into creating that mix. That would have not gone down well with the people who opposed the innovations offered by multi-track recording in the early 1950s. Their opposition was just like what we see with digital trickery such as auto-tune and the editing and composing tools available to any musician today. Hey, look, I'm guilty. You've heard me wail about auto-tune. I hate it. But what are you going to do? More generational battles coming up. This is part 2 of The More Things Change, the More Things Stay the Same. A look back at how people have always fought about musical tastes and changes in technology when it comes to actually making music. One issue that comes up again and again has to do with lyrics that rub people the wrong way because of their perceived foulness. We can talk about modern-day censorship, the crusades of various groups like the PMRC and others who seek to shut down free speech through music. But none of this is a new backlash of the modest against the profane in the baby boomer era. No. The battle over unacceptable lyrics goes back decades. When the gramophone and phonograph first took off around 1900, it didn't take long for people to start recording songs with dirty lyrics, and there was plenty of outrage. See what this new technology is bringing us? It's foul, I tell you, foul. When we got to the 1920s, early blues and jazz recordings appeared with very suggestive titles and lyrics, like You've Got to Give Me Some, Shake That Thing, and It's Tight Like That by Tampa Red and Georgia Tom in 1928. The audio is rough, but to get the full effect, we kind of have to hear it.
Listen now, folks, gonna sing a little song. Don't get mad, but don't mean no harm. You know it's tight like that. Beat it up, I'm boy, tight like that. Beat it up, I'm moving, you have to talk to you. I mean it's tight like that.
That was scandalous, evil. When we reached the rock and roll era, outrage really took off. Here's a magazine called Jet, writing in 1952. Never have there been as many dirty blues records on sale as today. No effort is made to conceal them. Usually, these words of innocent connotation to the naive deliver the listener directly to a bedroom and roughly describe sex activity. By cunning inflections and constant usage, words such as rockin', roll, rider, grind, and grass have been standard dirty record vocabulary. Conservative people didn't even have to understand the words to get all worked up. If they couldn't make out the lyrics, well, then they had to be dirty, right? What other explanation could there be? The best example is Louie Louie by the Kingsmen, a song recorded for $50 in Portland, Oregon on April 6, 1963. The track is a cover of a 1957 release by Richard Berry and tells the story of a sailor returning to Jamaica to see his true love. If we're going to do this properly, we need to hear the song twice. Here is the original. It goes like this, and take note of the lyrics.
I never think I'll make it home. Louie, Louie, well, me gotta go.
The original version of Louie Louie from 1957 by Richard Berry. I hope you remember some of the lyrics because we're now going to zip ahead to the Kingsmen at Northwestern Motion Pictures and Recording in Portland. This was a bare-bones session, April 6, 1963. One microphone hung in the center of the room with all the musicians gathered around it, very much like an old recording done about 1920. Singer Joe Ely was put in the center, which means he had to bend his neck all the way back and sing up into the overhead microphone, which is not the best technique for breathing and other things. Adding to his misery was the fact that he'd just been fitted with some very heavy braces on his teeth. Let's just say that he had a hard time articulating. Finally, the clock was running. The Kingsmen had time for just one take of the song, so they were rushed and under pressure. Again, not the best circumstances to capture a tight performance. There were more problems with the recording. First, at about 54 seconds into the song, the drummer drops one of his six. He actually shouts out the F-bomb, which you can hear but not make out. The second problem comes at 1:59, when Eli comes in 2 bars too early. You can hear him start his line, but then the drummer covers up the goof with a big drum fill. The song continues in its shambolic way until it ends 45 seconds later. So let's have a listen. And while we're doing that, tell me if you can make out any more than a fraction of the lyrics. All right, you got that? Here's where the intergenerational freakout began. Rumors began to spread that the Kingsmen had intentionally garbled the lyrics to cover up what was actually being sung. The song told, allegedly, of a sexual encounter between that Jamaican sailor and his woman. No one really knew for sure, of course, but it was definitely profane and explicit and obscene and immoral and disgusting and dirty. The so-called real secret lyrics were passed around amongst teenagers, one of whom was so freaked out and traumatized, so the story goes, that she contacted the governor of Indiana. He was so outraged that he banned the song from the state, which included forbidding radio stations from playing it. This was perfect. While college students wrote increasingly dirty fake lyrics and passed them around, the mystique of the song grew and grew, pushing it up the national song charts. The song's publishing company offered $1,000 to anyone who could prove that the lyrics to the Kingsmen's version of Louie Louie were in fact obscene. And even the FBI got involved, analyzing the recording backwards and forwards, looking for any kind of clue that it was in fact a dirty song. They eventually gave up, but they stayed at it for 2 years. Their conclusion? Louie Louie was unintelligible at any speed. And since then, the song has been covered more than 1,600 times by everyone from the Beach Boys to the Stooges to Motorhead to Black Flag to the Smashing Pumpkins. I can't vouch for any of the lyrics in those recordings, but thankfully, we've moved on. From dirty words, let's move to dirty dancing. If you think that twerking was the first dance move, that's what it is, right? To get people upset, you would be wrong. Very, very wrong. Let me take you back to 1920, when there was an outbreak of dancing mania following the Great War. And this dancing was, was much more enthusiastic than what the oldsters were comfortable with. This is from an editorial in the Daily Mail in 1920. Graceful dancing is dead in ballrooms. We conclude that foxtrot and one-step express our odd and ugly manners, our modern helter-skelter. They show the wheel coming again full circle, back to the Polynesian round the campfire with the tom-tom. Okay, that's not racist at all. It continues. Don't the daily cases in the divorce court and elsewhere lead us to suppose that manners have become uncontrollable, like the foxtrot, which images them on the ballroom floor? Now, the expectation was that as soon as life got back to normal after the war, then civilized dancing, such as waltzing, would once again reassert itself. Now, as a side note, the waltz was once considered scandalous because it required a man and a woman to come very close together and touch each other while dancing. The harshest comments were reserved for the Charleston, a dance that saw, in fact encouraged, young women to writhe on the dance floor in front of strangers. The Charleston scared so many people that it was banned in some jurisdictions for being too sexual and vulgar. There were even rumors that some universities prohibited the dancing of the Charleston for fear that old buildings wouldn't be able to withstand all that jumping around. Anything sound even remotely similar to what your parents may have said about your dancing preferences? A few more examples of how the more things change, the more they stay the same, coming up. We've been going back through the history of recorded music and noting how the same issues and the same complaints keep coming up generation after generation. The people and the music come and go, but the nature of the bitching is always the same. There have always been people who blame music for violence and crime. How many times have you heard that about hip-hop and rap? But this kind of scapegoating was common in the 1920s, when hot jazz was blamed for turning people on to illegal alcohol. This was prohibition, remember? As well as illicit sex. The same cries were heard in the 30s and 40s about rhythm and blues. This was the devil's music that inevitably led to crime. When rock and roll really hit in the middle 1950s, it was blamed for everything that was wrong with the post-war generation. At one point, what we're about to hear was considered to be the most dangerous, the most horrid, and the most destructive 2 minutes and 8 seconds of all time.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on. Join me home.
Now, there were previous versions of Rock Around the Clock, but the 1954 recording by Bill Haley and the Comets was the one that threatened to bring down the British Empire. Nothing happened for almost a year after its release, but then it was selected to run over the opening and closing credits of a movie called Blackboard Jungle. This was the story of a teacher at a multiracial inner school where the students weren't all that well behaved. He has a tough time and even ends up facing down a kid with a switchblade. Teenagers ate this up, especially in Britain in 1956. It became a thing to dance in the aisles, carve up the theater seats with knives, get into fights, and even turn fire hoses on each other in the theater. The British press jumped all over this story with the position that this new rock and roll music was corrupting the nation's youth. A bishop called for the movie to be banned from the UK. Others said that rock was proof of a revival of devil dancing, the sort of thing done in black magic rituals. I didn't make that up. And a newspaper columnist said that if rock and roll was going to cause the same sorts of problems as alcohol, then it should be controlled and regulated in exactly the same way. Meanwhile, musicians' unions were losing their minds too. The British public doesn't want any rock and roll, said one union leader. Only a few silly kids do. All rock became a target. Variety magazine said it was the most destructive force in the country, a lewd, lascivious, and larcenous influence on youth. Dances were banned in Connecticut. A psychiatrist categorized rock as a communicable disease, cannibalistic and tribalistic. And I love this. An organization in Alabama proclaimed that rock was a plot initiated by black people to, quote, undermine the morals of the youth of our nation by pulling the white man down to the level of the Negro. Shortly afterwards, that organization changed their name to the Ku Klux Klan of the Confederacy. Yeah. Here's something just as awful from a British newspaper review. It's deplorable, it is tribal, and it is from America. It follows ragtime, blues, jazz, hot cha-cha, and the boogie-woogie, which surely originated in the jungle. We sometimes wonder whether this is the Negro's revenge. Wow, but that's somebody writing in 1956. Let's keep going with a few more assorted quotes from the pundits of the day. 1959, popular music is an orgy of gut-spilling, whimpering, and sobbing. 1964, inarticulate, childish, incoherent, and disgusting. 1971, somebody actually wrote this. 95% of all illegitimate children are conceived following a rock concert. It was a preacher. He actually believed that. None of this actually slowed anything down, of course. We got Elvis, then Little Richard, then Jerry Lee Lewis. And then after that, the Beatles. And then after the Beatles, rock was unstoppable. No matter how many ministers wailed against it, no matter how many records were burned, no matter how many authorities tried to crack down on it, rock was here to stay.
Stop the rock, can't stop the rock, you can't stop the rock. Stop the rock. Stop the rock. Stop the rock, can't stop the rock, you can't stop the rock.
Here are a few more things that have come up again and again in the history of recorded music. Girls screaming their brains out at some pretty male singer. The first object of affection was Rudy Vallee back in the 1920s. The next generation, the daughters of Vallee fans, latched onto Frank Sinatra, and the granddaughters became screaming Beatlemaniacs. Manufactured pop stars. Nothing new, as old as the hills. Music publishers, managers, and record labels have been doing this since before World War I. Find somebody cute, give them a big marketing push, and then count the money. Let me give you a quote from 1962. Record companies create scores and scores of synthetic phonographic personalities every year, concocted from varying potions of human voice and electronic manipulation. The only sounds that are heard from their records may only bear a passing resemblance to those that were crooned into the microphone. So technology was screwing things up. And then there were all the times that rock has been declared dead. This is from the Daily Mirror in 1956. Rock and roll is out of date, old-fashioned. Skiffle music is the new coming craze. They're turning London's espresso bars into modern versions of the old-time music hall. Rock and roll was also declared dead in the early 1960s. At around the same time, the Beatles were rejected by Decca Records because their talent scouts believed that guitar groups were on their way out. One of London's papers wrote, "By Christmas, the public will have tired of background noise created by 3 guitars and a drum beat." Rock was declared dead again in the early 70s, the late 70s during disco, the middle 80s, the middle 90s, and again and again and again. Funny how it's still with us, though. Along with dirty lyrics, crazy dancing, manufactured idols, new technology that only the young seem to understand, freaked out parents, disapproving pastors, moralizing editorialists, music snobs, busts and booms and trends and cycles, and those who think that all the good music was made when they were young. Again, the more things change, the more they've stayed the same.
And sometimes you close your eyes and see the place where you used to live when you were young.
I think it's fascinating how what comes around goes around. Just remember that every time you pass judgment on another generation's music, somebody is passing judgment on yours. But this is the way it's always been, and it will stay this way until the heat death of the universe. Just remember the next time that you get into one of these arguments and, well, you know. Reach me at alan@alancross.ca. I read everything and answer everything. Plus, there's my website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com. It's updated every single day, often more than once a day, as a matter of fact. Music news, music recommendations, opinion, that kind of thing. I hope you all get the newsletter. It's free, never comes with any spam. You can subscribe and get all kinds of music news in your inbox by 10 a.m. Eastern every weekday. And you can look for me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google+. Oh, and don't forget to sign up for the Ongoing History YouTube channel. New stuff appears every week. Technical production is by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross. Subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and everywhere you find your favorite podcasts.